Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is provided strictly for educational and entertainment purposes and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional psychological advice. Marital laws and social implications vary significantly by jurisdiction and individual circumstance. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with licensed attorneys or qualified family counselors regarding their specific situation before making any life-altering decisions. Imagine standing at the altar in 1950. You are making a vow that, for better or worse, is essentially a social and economic death grip. Fast forward to the United States in 2026, and that same vow has transformed into something closer to a flexible service level agreement. Currently living through the era of the divorce now mentality, a cultural phenomenon where the threshold for exiting a lifelong commitment has reached an all-time low. Statistically, in many urban American hubs, the average lifespan of a modern marriage is now shorter than the duration of a standard auto loan. This is not just a shift in personal preference. It is a fundamental restructuring of the American social contract. We have moved from a culture of repair to a culture of replacement, and the ripple effects are tearing through our economy, our legal systems, and the very fabric of the next generation's mental health. This deep dive is going to pull back the curtain on why this happened, who benefits from the divorce industrial complex, and the cold, hard reality of what happens to a society when "until death do us part" is replaced by "until I am no longer optimized." The problem this deep dive solves for you today is one of clarity and survival. Whether you are currently married, considering it, or navigating the aftermath of a split, you are operating within a system designed to incentivize separation. By understanding the historical trends, the psychological triggers, and the economic machinery behind the divorce now mentality, you will gain the ability to see through the cultural noise. You will learn to identify the grass is greener fallacies propagated by digital media, understand the true long-term fiscal impact of the disposable spouse trend, and ultimately, you will be equipped with the data-driven perspective needed to navigate the most high-stakes relationship landscape in human history. We are moving beyond the surface-level tropes of irreconcilable differences and digging into the structural foundations of why America became the global leader in marital dissolution. To understand where we are in 2026, we have to examine the legal architecture that made this possible. The divorce now mentality did not emerge in a vacuum. It was built on the back of the 1969 No-Fault Divorce Act signed in California. Before this, obtaining a divorce in the United States was a grueling adversarial process that required proof of fault, adultery, abandonment, or extreme cruelty. This created a high barrier to entry for the legal system. When the requirement for fault was removed, the floodgates opened. Historically, this was intended to provide a safety valve for truly toxic or abusive situations, a move that was, at the time, a necessary evolution for human rights and individual safety. However, the unintended consequence over the subsequent decades was the normalization of the exit door. Potential outcomes of this shift included a massive surge in divorce rates during the 1970s and 80s, which plateaued but then evolved into a more insidious, quiet divorce now culture in the 21st century. We must look at the psychological shift from covenant marriage to companionate marriage. In a covenant model, the marriage is viewed as a foundational unit of society, often backed by religious or community pressure. The individual's happiness is secondary to the stability of the unit. In the modern companionate model, the marriage exists primarily to serve the individual's self-actualization. If the marriage stops sparking joy or fails to facilitate the personal growth of one partner, the divorce now mentality suggests that staying is actually a moral failing against oneself. This is a radical departure from historical norms. We see case studies in modern therapy where individual happiness is positioned as the ultimate barometer of success, often ignoring the long-term compounding benefits of endurance and shared history. The divorce now mentality is further accelerated by what social scientists call the paradox of choice, amplified to an extreme degree by the digital dating economy. In 2026, the average American is bombarded with the illusion of infinite options. Social media algorithms curate a feed of perfect lives and potential better partners, creating a constant state of comparison. This leads to a phenomenon known as relationship FOMO, or fear of missing out. When a marriage hits the inevitable boring or difficult phase, which every long-term relationship must, the divorce now mentality offers an immediate dopamine hit via the prospect of a new start. This is the consumerist approach to human connection. If the product is slightly dented, you don't fix it. You order a new one with one-click shipping. Let's talk about the economic incentivization of separation. There is a multi-billion-dollar divorce industrial complex in the United States that thrives on the divorce now mentality. From high-priced litigators to specialized real estate agents and divorce coaches, a massive segment of the service economy is optimized to facilitate the dismantling of households. When a couple stays together, they are a single economic unit with shared expenses. When they divorce, they become two separate consumers, requiring two residences, two sets of appliances, and two separate legal teams. The data suggests that the divorce now trend is a massive driver of consumer spending, albeit one fueled by the destruction of generational wealth. Case studies of midlife divorces show that the cost of splitting assets often sets both parties back by 10 to 15 years in their retirement planning, yet the cultural narrative focuses almost exclusively on the emotional liberation of the act. Furthermore, we must address the social contagion effect. Divorce has become a trending social milestone. In 2026, divorce parties and untying the knot celebrations are common content fodder for influencers. When a prominent figure in a social circle or a celebrity initiates a quick divorce, it lowers the social cost for everyone in their orbit. It creates a feedback loop where the perceived normality of divorce makes it the default solution for marital friction rather than the last resort. This contagion is particularly evident in the gray divorce trend, couples over the age of 50 who are splitting at record rates. They are often the children of the original 1970s divorce boom, and they are now applying that same divorce now logic to their sunset years, prioritizing a decade of independent freedom over the stability of a long-term family legacy. Step by step, the process of the divorce now mentality takes hold through a specific life cycle. First, there is the devaluation phase, where the partner's flaws are magnified by the constant comparison to idealized versions of people online. Second is the legal exploration phase, where the ease of no-fault laws makes the what-if scenarios feel low risk. Third is the social validation phase, where the individual seeks out echo chambers, friends or online communities that validate the urge to leave without questioning the underlying issues. Finally, there is the execution phase, where the speed of the modern legal system allows for a rapid dissolution, often before the parties have had time to move past the temporary emotional volatility that triggered the impulse in the first place. The cultural impact on the American family unit is perhaps the most significant potential outcome of this mentality. We are seeing a rise in transient households, where children move through a revolving door of step-parents and mom/dad's new friends. While the narrative suggests that happy parents make happy children, longitudinal studies often point to a more complex reality. The instability of the divorce now culture creates a baseline of anxiety in the younger generation, who then enter their own relationships with a pre-planned exit strategy. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy of instability. When you enter a commitment believing it will likely end, you withhold the level of vulnerability and all-in effort required to make it succeed. You are essentially building a house with one foot out the door, and in the high-wind environment of 2026 life, that house is destined to collapse. This deep dive is not about judgment. It is about the cold analysis of a cultural shift that is reshaping the American identity. We are moving toward a future where the individual is the only recognized unit of society, and the family is merely a temporary voluntary association. The divorce now mentality is the engine of this change. As we move through the remaining 9 parts of this masterclass, we will break down the specific financial traps of the divorce now era, the psychological warfare of the modern courtroom, and how you can protect your legacy in a culture that treats commitment as a disposable commodity. The stakes have never been higher, and the cost of being wrong about your relationship strategy has never been more expensive. Stay tuned because we are just scratching the surface of how the divorce now mentality is changing everything you thought you knew about the American dream. To understand how we reached this boiling point in 2026, we have to look at the micro-level reality of a typical American household. Imagine a couple named Mark and Sarah living in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. It is a Tuesday evening in April 2026. Mark is a project manager for a renewable energy firm, and Sarah is a senior analyst in healthcare logistics. On paper, they are the quintessential success story of the modern American middle class. They have 2 children, a mortgage that they secured during the volatile rate fluctuations of 2024, and a social circle that views them as a pillar of stability. However, underneath the surface, the divorce now mentality is already beginning its silent work. The first stage of this cultural impact is what sociologists call the internal devaluation. In 2026, the average American spends upwards of 7 hours a day on digital devices. For Sarah, her social media feed is a curated stream of high-performance lifestyle content. She sees influencers her age who have rebranded their lives through what they call a midlife pivot. They document their post-divorce wellness retreats in Sedona, their minimalist new apartments in the city, and their newfound sense of self-actualization. This creates a psychological phenomenon known as comparative deprivation. Sarah begins to look at her 14-year marriage not as the foundation, but as an anchor. The divorce now mentality whispers that her current life is a sunk cost, and that she is essentially losing time by staying. Historical trends show that in previous decades, a couple like Mark and Sarah would have sought out a marriage counselor or a religious leader to bridge the gap. In 2026, however, the trend has shifted toward solo consultation. Sarah does not download a couples therapy app. She downloads a personal optimization app. These platforms, powered by the latest AI models, are designed to maximize individual utility. When she inputs her feelings of stagnation, the algorithm does not suggest compromise or sacrifice. Instead, it provides potential outcomes for her life as an independent agent. It calculates her projected alimony based on North Carolina state laws, her potential career trajectory without domestic constraints, and even matches her with social groups for single professionals in her demographic. This is the first step in the systematic dismantling of the family unit, the transition from we to me, facilitated by technology that views commitment as a friction point. Now let's look at the financial architecture that turns this mentality into a reality. Imagine the moment Sarah mentions the word separation. In 2026, the American legal system has become a streamlined machine for dissolution. We have seen the rise of the express divorce portal, where couples can file and serve papers with the same ease as ordering groceries. This low barrier to entry is marketed as a way to reduce stress, but case studies suggest it actually removes the cooling-off period that once saved thousands of marriages. When the friction of leaving is removed, the frequency of leaving increases. For Mark and Sarah, the economic impact is immediate and devastating. In the current 2026 housing market, selling their family home is not a simple transaction. With the inventory shortages and the rise of institutional buyers, they are faced with a reality where neither of them can afford a comparable home on a single income. The divorce now mentality creates a situation where individuals choose a lower standard of living for the promise of emotional autonomy. Data indicates that in 2026, the average American divorcee sees a 41% drop in their household wealth within the first 18 months of separation. This is the hidden tax of the disposable spouse culture. It is an economic reset that wipes out years of compounding interest and home equity, often just to satisfy a temporary psychological urge for change. Step by step, the divorce now mentality feeds a massive ancillary market. We have to discuss the divorce industrial complex in more detail. This is not just about lawyers. In 2026, we see a surge in professionals known as transition architects. These are consultants who charge $500 an hour to help individuals rebrand their social media profiles, find new housing, and even script their conversations with their children. There are real estate agencies that specialize exclusively in the quick flip of marital assets. These entities do not benefit from reconciliation, they benefit from the split. This creates a societal environment where the default advice from the professional class is to move forward with the divorce. When your entire support system is financially incentivized to see you separate, the chances of a marriage surviving a rough patch drop to near zero. Furthermore, we must examine the impact on the labor market. In 2026, corporate America is beginning to grapple with the divorce productivity gap. Case studies from major tech hubs like Seattle and San Francisco show that an employee going through a contested divorce loses an average of 320 work hours per year to legal meetings, emotional distress, and logistical restructuring. This creates a ripple effect where the personal instability of the American worker is directly impacting the national GDP. The divorce now mentality suggests that the individual will be more productive once they are free, but the historical data from 2024 to 2026 suggests the opposite. The trauma of the split often leads to a long-term decline in professional performance, further compounding the financial loss. Then, there is the social contagion aspect. Imagine if Mark and Sarah's best friends, another couple named Jim and Lisa, see the initial liberation Sarah portrays on her Instagram. They see the new apartment, the travel photos, and the glowing captions about finding her truth. They don't see the nights she spends crying over the shared custody schedule, or the massive debt she is accruing to maintain her new lifestyle. Jim and Lisa only see the highlight reel of the divorce now mentality. This creates a domino effect in social circles. In 2026, researchers have observed that if a close friend gets a divorce, your own chances of divorcing increase by nearly 75%. We are living in an era where divorce is as contagious as a viral trend, and it is spreading through the American middle class at an unprecedented rate. Consider the role of the 2026 educational system. Children in this environment are being raised with the understanding that all relationships are conditional and temporary. This is not just a change in household structure, it is a change in the human psyche. When a child sees their parents treat a decade-long marriage like a subscription service they can cancel at any time, they lose the ability to visualize long-term endurance. They are being conditioned for a life of high-churn relationships, which leads to a society of individuals who are perpetually starting over, never reaching the deep, compounding benefits of lifelong partnership. The potential outcomes of this trend are staggering. We are looking at a future where the concept of generational wealth is a relic of the past, as every generation's assets are liquidated and divided in their prime earning years. We are looking at a healthcare crisis, as the lack of a domestic support system in old age forces more Americans into state-funded care. The divorce now mentality is not just a personal choice. It is a macroeconomic shift that is hollowing out the stability of the United States. But what happens when the legal papers are signed and the initial dopamine hit of freedom wears off? What happens when the reality of the 2026 economy hits a single-income household with no safety net? In the next part, we are going to dive into the dark side of the post-divorce reality that no influencer will tell you about. We will analyze the specific financial traps designed to keep you in debt once you leave your partner, and we will look at the emerging data on the regret rate of the divorce now generation. You will see why the exit door is so easy to open, but almost impossible to walk back through. We are moving from the cultural causes to the cold, hard consequences. You cannot afford to miss the data we are about to uncover about the true cost of a 2026 separation. The initial euphoria of the divorce now mentality is often described by psychologists as the honeymoon phase of separation. For Sarah, this lasted exactly 84 days. In the immediate aftermath of her split from Mark in early 2026, she felt an intoxicating sense of relief. The constant low-level friction of domestic life was gone. No more compromising on the thermostat, no more navigating Mark's weekend golf schedule, and no more emotional labor required to maintain a failing partnership. On social media, she was the protagonist of her own rebirth. She posted photos of her new minimalist apartment in uptown Charlotte, tagged with slogans about choosing herself. To her followers and even to her friends Jim and Lisa, Sarah appeared to be the success story that justified the divorce now movement. But by the fourth month, the architectural flaws of a single-income life in the 2026 American economy began to manifest with brutal precision. The first potential outcome Sarah had to confront was the dramatic contraction of her purchasing power. In the dual-income era of their marriage, Mark and Sarah's combined household income sat comfortably at $240,000. This allowed them to navigate the high inflation environment of the mid-2020s with relative ease. However, the legal dissolution of their union triggered a mandatory unbundling of their economic efficiency. Sarah soon discovered that the cost of living as a single unit is not 50% of a married unit. It is closer to 75%. Her new apartment, while smaller, cost nearly as much as their previous mortgage due to the 2026 rental surge driven by corporate housing acquisitions. When she factored in the loss of their bundled insurance rates, the increase in her individual tax liability, often referred to as the marriage penalty in reverse, and the logistical costs of setting up a new household, Sarah found her discretionary income had vanished. Case studies of the 2026 separation trend highlight a specific financial trap known as the liquidity crunch of the newly single. To finalize the divorce, Sarah and Mark had to sell their family home, which they had purchased in 2019 at a 3% interest rate. When they liquidated that asset to split the equity, they walked away with a significant sum of cash, but they also walked away from the most valuable financial tool they owned, cheap debt. To find a new place to live, Sarah had to enter a market where interest rates were hovering near 7%. She realized that the $300,000 she received from the house sale could no longer buy her the same quality of life. Step by step, she saw her net worth being eroded by the very system that promised her freedom. She was now paying more for less, a recurring theme in the 2026 post-divorce reality. the psychological toll began to shift from liberation to what researchers call decision fatigue. In a partnership, the cognitive load of life is shared. Mark handled the automotive maintenance, the long-term investment tracking, and the home security systems. Sarah managed the healthcare logistics, the children's educational planning, and the social calendar. Now, in the Divorce Now reality, Sarah was responsible for 100% of the decisions 100% of the time. This led to a state of chronic hypervigilance. Imagine if every minor household crisis, from a leaking water heater to a child's sudden fever at 3 a.m., is entirely your responsibility to solve without a backup. Historical trends suggest that this sustained level of stress leads to a higher burnout rate among single parents in 2026 than in any previous generation, largely due to the collapse of the extended family support network. Then there is the reality of the 2026 dating landscape, which Sarah entered with high expectations. The Divorce Now mentality is fueled by the belief that a better match is just a swipe away. However, Sarah found that the digital dating economy of 2026 had become increasingly transactional. The algorithms, optimized for user retention rather than long-term matching, kept her in a cycle of high-churn interactions. She encountered the high-stakes ghosting culture, where potential partners, also influenced by the disposable mentality, viewed her not as a person but as a temporary optimization of their own time. She spent hundreds of dollars on premium dating subscriptions that promised better visibility, only to find that the pool of available partners was also comprised of individuals fleeing their own commitments, often carrying significant emotional and financial baggage. The impact on the children, which we will explore in even greater depth later, began to surface in Sarah's household through the logistics of the shared custody schedule. 2026, the American workforce is more demanding than ever, and the coordination required to move 2 children between 2 homes every 4 days became a secondary job. Sarah and Mark had to use a court-monitored parenting app to communicate, as the initial civility of their split began to erode under the pressure of logistical friction. Each transition day resulted in lost productivity for both parents and a visible increase in anxiety for the children. Sarah realized that she hadn't just divorced Mark. She had divorced the stability of her children's daily routine. The freedom she sought had come at the price of their consistency. We also have to look at the social capital loss. In the United States in 2026, social circles are often built around couplehood and shared family stages. When Sarah divorced, she didn't just lose a husband. She lost a place in her community. Jim and Lisa, who were still married, found it increasingly awkward to include Sarah in their weekend plans. The presence of a newly single friend often served as a reminder of the fragility of their own union. Sarah found herself relegated to a new social tier, one populated by other divorcees who were also struggling to find their footing. This fragmentation of social life is a primary driver of the loneliness epidemic currently sweeping through the American suburbs. By the end of 2026, the regret curve often reaches its peak. Historical trends indicate that while 70% of individuals report being happier immediately following a divorce, that number drops to below 40% within 24 months for those whose separations were not driven by abuse or extreme conflict. Sarah began to realize that the problems she had with Mark were actually the universal problems of long-term human cohabitation, intensified by a culture that tells you that you shouldn't have to deal with them. She had traded a set of manageable, familiar problems for a new set of expensive, isolating, and structural problems. The cold, hard truth of the 2026 Divorce Now mentality is that it often sells a solution to a psychological problem by creating a series of permanent logistical and financial disasters. We have analyzed the cause and we have looked at the immediate fallout for individuals like Sarah. But there is an even darker layer to this story. We have talked about the parents, but we haven't talked about the silent victims of this cultural shift, the children of the 2026 divorce boom. What happens to a generation raised in a world where commitment is seen as a liability? How does the Divorce Now mindset rewire the brain of a 10-year-old? In the next part, we are going to look at the terrifying data regarding the psychological development of children in transient households and the rise of the generational trust deficit. We are moving from the cost of the individual to the cost of the future. The data we are about to reveal will change the way you look at the American family forever. To understand the full weight of the Divorce Now mentality, we have to look past the adults and into the eyes of the primary stakeholders who have no seat at the negotiating table: the children. In 2026, we are witnessing the first generation of Americans being raised in an environment where the dissolution of the family unit is not seen as a tragedy, but as a standard logistical update. Imagine 10-year-old Leo and 7-year-old Emma, the children of Mark and Sarah. In the previous era of American life, a child's home was a fixed point of gravity. In 2026, for Leo and Emma, home has become a fluid concept, a series of coordinates that shift every Wednesday and every other weekend. This is the birth of the suitcase lifestyle, a term social scientists are using to describe the fragmented existence of millions of American minors. The potential outcomes for children like Leo are being mapped in real time by developmental psychologists. We are seeing the emergence of what is called the generational trust deficit. When a child observes that the most fundamental bond in their life, the union of their parents, is subject to a cancel-at-any-time policy, their internal blueprint for human connection is fundamentally rewired. Step by step, the child internalizes a specific logic. If love is conditional and commitment is transient, then emotional investment is a high-risk, low-reward strategy. Historical trends suggest that children from high-conflict or high-churn households often develop an adaptive detachment. This is a survival mechanism where the child learns to keep their emotions at a distance to avoid the trauma of the next inevitable split. In 2026, this detachment is being amplified by the digital world, where these children retreat into virtual environments that offer more consistency than their physical living rooms. Consider the neurological impact of this environment. Imagine the stress response system of a child during a transition day. In 2026, the handover often happens in neutral zones, or through a series of time drop-offs coordinated by GPS-enabled parenting apps. For Emma, the 7-year-old, these days are marked by a measurable spike in cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. This is not just a temporary feeling of being upset, it is a physiological state of hypervigilance. When a child's environment is in a state of perpetual flux, their brain prioritizes the development of the amygdala, the area responsible for detecting threats, over the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for deep learning, logic, and impulse control. The divorce now mentality essentially keeps these children in a state of low-grade survival mode. Case studies from 2025 and 2026 show that children in multi-household arrangements are 40% more likely to struggle with focus-related issues in school, not because of a lack of intelligence, but because their cognitive resources are being consumed by the logistical and emotional complexity of their lives. Furthermore, we must analyze the phenomenon of parental ranking and the gamification of affection. In a single-unit household, parents generally present a united front regarding discipline and resources. In the divorce now reality of 2026, Mark and Sarah are often inadvertently in competition. To compensate for the guilt of the split or to win the favor of the children during their limited time, parents often engage in Disney dad or fun mom behaviors. Leo at age 10 is old enough to sense this power dynamic. He begins to learn how to leverage the split to his advantage, a behavior known as triangulation. He knows that if Mark says no to a new gaming console, he can frame the request to Sarah in a way that triggers her competitive instinct to be the preferred parent. While this might seem like a child simply being clever, the long-term potential outcome is the erosion of the child's moral compass. They are learning that relationships are not about mutual growth and shared values, but about the tactical management of the people around them. The 2026 educational system is also seeing the rise of the split-shift academic gap. Imagine a teacher in a typical American suburb. On any given Monday, nearly half of her students are coming from a different house than the one they left on Friday. Homework is lost in transit, textbooks are left at the other parent's apartment, and the emotional state of the student is entirely dependent on which parent they were with over the weekend. This creates a massive administrative and educational burden. Schools are now forced to employ transition coordinators whose entire job is to manage the logistical chaos caused by the divorce now mentality. We are seeing a trend where the school, rather than the home, is becoming the only place of stability for these children, yet the schools are not equipped to handle the psychological depth of this crisis. The long-term economic shadow of this childhood instability is another critical factor. Data from 2026 indicates that children raised in the divorce now culture are significantly more likely to carry high levels of student debt and have lower credit scores in their early 20s. This is often linked to the dilution of parental resources. Instead of a single college fund, the family's wealth has been split between two households, two sets of legal fees, and two separate retirement plans. The children of the 2026 divorce boom are entering adulthood with less of a financial safety net than any generation before them, precisely at a time when the cost of entry into the American middle class is at an all-time high. We also have to discuss the social contagion among the youth. In 2026, Leo's peer group views divorce as an inevitability. On playgrounds and in digital chat rooms, children discuss their parents' custody schedules with the same casualness that previous generations discussed their favorite TV shows. This normalization of instability means that these children are entering their own first romantic relationships with a pre-baked expectation of failure. They are the architects of the situationship era, where labels are avoided and exit strategies are established before the first date. The divorce now mentality has created a generation that is functionally allergic to the concept of forever. Step by step, the cultural impact of this mentality is creating a society of hyper-individualists. If you cannot rely on your family, and you cannot rely on the permanence of your home, you learn to rely only on yourself. While self-reliance is often viewed as a virtue, in this context, it is a form of isolation. The 2026 American child is becoming more resilient in a superficial sense, but more fragile in their ability to form the deep, interlocking social bonds that have historically been the bedrock of a healthy civilization. We are building a future populated by people who are experts at leaving but have no idea how to stay. But what if the drive toward this mentality isn't just coming from personal choice or social media influencers? What if the very tools we use to navigate our lives are being engineered to push us toward separation? In the next part, we are going to expose the algorithmic incentivization of divorce. We will look at how big tech and the legal tech industry are using predictive modeling to identify struggling marriages and serve them ads for divorce attorneys before the couple has even had their first argument. We are moving from the psychological impact on the family to the technological warfare being waged against your marriage. You will see how your phone knows you're headed for a split before you do, and why that is worth billions of dollars to the companies tracking your every move. The intersection of artificial intelligence and marital dissolution is the next frontier of this masterclass, and the data is more chilling than you can imagine. To understand the technological warfare being waged against the American marriage in 2026, we have to look at the device currently sitting in your pocket. Your smartphone is no longer just a communication tool. It has become a digital stethoscope, monitoring the heartbeat of your relationship with terrifying precision. In the era of the divorce now mentality, your personal data has become the most valuable lead generation tool for the multi-billion-dollar legal tech industry. Imagine Mark sitting in his car after a particularly tense argument with Sarah. He hasn't looked up divorce attorneys yet. He hasn't even told his best friend Jim that things are bad. But he did spend 45 minutes the night before browsing for one-bedroom apartments on a real estate app just to see what was out there. He also searched for how to explain big changes to kids on a search engine. In the 2026 data economy, these are not just isolated actions. They are high-intent signals that trigger a massive, invisible machinery designed to push him toward the exit. The mechanics of this algorithmic incentivization start with predictive modeling. By 2026, advertising algorithms have evolved far beyond simple keyword matching. They now utilize sentiment analysis and behavioral metadata to predict life transitions before they happen. When the system detects a shift in Mark's location data, perhaps he is spending more time at the office or at a gym late at night, combined with his change in spending patterns, the algorithm assigns him a high probability score for marital dissolution. Historical trends show that the period immediately following a major holiday or a summer vacation is peak season for these triggers. For Mark, this means that within 24 hours of that car argument, his social media feeds, his news apps, and even his email sidebars begin to populate with content that normalizes separation. He sees articles titled "Why 40 is the New 20 for Single Men" or case studies on how co-parenting apps make life easier than living together. This is not a coincidence. It is a targeted psychological nudge. We must address the economic reality of why big tech and the legal tech sector want the divorce now mentality to thrive. From a pure data perspective, a married couple is a single, efficient consumer unit. They share a Netflix account, a Prime membership, a cellular plan, and a mortgage. They are, in essence, a consolidated revenue stream. However, once that couple divorces, they become two separate, less efficient, and far more profitable consumer units. They now require two of everything. 2 homes, 2 sets of furniture, 2 separate high-speed internet subscriptions, and 2 distinct sets of data profiles. In the 2026 economy, a divorce is a massive stimulus package for the service and tech sectors. Data indicates that the lifetime value of 2 divorced individuals to a tech ecosystem is significantly higher than that of a stable married couple. Consequently, the platforms have a structural, financial incentive to serve content that highlights the potential outcomes of a split, rather than the benefits of reconciliation. Case studies in 2026 have identified a phenomenon known as algorithmic gaslighting. This occurs when the technology begins to feed the user an echo chamber of dissatisfaction. For Sarah, the algorithm notices she is lingering longer on videos about narcissism, red flags in partners, or late bloomer success stories. Instead of showing her content about marriage communication or conflict resolution, the 2026 feed logic doubles down on her current emotional state. It presents her with a curated reality where everyone is leaving, everyone is happier, and her specific struggles with Mark are categorized as irreconcilable. Step by step, the technology erodes her perspective. It makes the divorce now option feel like a global movement she is missing out on, rather than a personal tragedy with long-term consequences. Furthermore, we must look at the rise of the frictionless divorce apps. In 2026, the legal industry has been disrupted by platforms that market themselves as the Uber for separation. These apps use AI to automate the division of assets, the filing of paperwork, and even the drafting of custody agreements. While this is marketed as a way to reduce legal fees, a genuine concern for many Americans, the psychological impact is the removal of the cooling-off period. In historical legal frameworks, the sheer difficulty and bureaucracy of getting a divorce acted as a natural break system, allowing couples time to reconsider or seek help. In 2026, that break system has been removed. When a couple can initiate a legal separation with 3 taps on a screen during a moment of high emotional volatility, the frequency of divorce naturally spikes. The technology has made the most difficult decision of a person's life as impulsive as a late-night clothing purchase. Imagine if Mark receives a notification from a financial app that says, based on your current trajectory, you could save 15% on taxes by filing separately next year. To a man already feeling the strain of a difficult marriage, this isn't just financial data. It is a permission slip. The 2026 divorce now mentality is being coded into the very infrastructure of our daily lives. We see the emergence of specialized credit cards for the newly single, offering points on moving services and therapy, and subscription boxes tailored for the first 6 months of living alone. These products do not exist to support people in a crisis. They exist to monetize the crisis, and to do that, they must ensure the crisis actually happens. The potential outcomes of this technological interference are a total fragmentation of the American social fabric. When the algorithm becomes the primary advisor in a marriage, the human element of endurance is replaced by a digital demand for optimization. We are seeing a trend where people are divorcing not because of abuse or infidelity, but because their data profile suggested they could be 3% happier elsewhere. This is the ultimate triumph of the consumerist mindset over the human heart. We are treating our most sacred bonds as outdated software that needs to be uninstalled to make room for a newer version. Step by step, the 2026 divorce now mentality is also changing how we view our own memories. With the rise of AI-powered photo organization, your phone now has the ability to curate memories that exclude your spouse. In 2026, a user can toggle a setting that silences a specific person in their digital history. For Sarah, this means her phone stops showing her the happy moments from 5 years ago, and instead only highlights photos of her with her friends or her children. The technology helps her rewrite her own narrative in real time, making it easier to leave by systematically erasing the evidence of the love that once existed. This is a form of digital lobotomy that makes the divorce now choice feel more logical than it actually is. But this technological push is only half the story. While the algorithms are driving us apart, a new social phenomenon is emerging to fill the void. We have analyzed how the tech world profits from your split, but what about the physical world? In the next part, we are going to explore the rise of the divorce colony and the new American commune. We will look at how the 2026 economy is forcing divorced individuals into strange new living arrangements that are replacing the traditional family home. You will see the rise of co-living spaces designed specifically for single fathers, and the suburban blocks that have become de facto dormitories for the newly separated. We are moving from the invisible world of algorithms to the concrete reality of where we will all live when the American family finally breaks. This is the geography of a fragmented nation, and the layout of these new communities will tell you everything you need to know about where we are headed. The physical landscape of the United States in 2026 is undergoing a structural transformation that no urban planner could have predicted a decade ago. We are witnessing the death of the traditional nuclear family suburb and the birth of the divorce colony. To understand this, we have to look at Mark's life 6 months after the papers were served. Mark is no longer living in the 4-bedroom colonial with the manicured lawn. In the 2026 economy, the math for a single father simply does not add up for that lifestyle. Instead, Mark has moved into a new type of residential development that is proliferating across the Sun Belt and the Midwest: the co-parenting nexus. Imagine a high-density, modern apartment complex specifically zoned and marketed for single parents. This is not a dormitory. It is a highly engineered environment designed to solve the logistical nightmare created by the divorce now mentality. Mark's new home is a 2-bedroom unit within a complex where 40% of the residents are in a similar custody arrangement. The facility features shared amenities that the traditional suburban home lacks: an on-site 24-hour childcare center, a communal kitchen where meal prep services deliver bulk family dinners, and most importantly, the visitation suites. These are soundproofed, highly aesthetic common areas designed to look like cozy living rooms, allowing parents who live in smaller units to have a space that feels like a real home when they have their children for the weekend. This is the rise of the divorce colony. In 2026, we see clusters of these developments appearing near major corporate hubs. Historical trends indicate that as the cost of individual housing units has skyrocketed, the divorced population has been forced into a form of involuntary collectivism. Mark is paying $3,000 a month for a space that is half the size of his old house, but he is paying for the proximity to other people who understand his schedule. However, there is a psychological potential outcome that many overlook: the transition from a private family life to a public, observed existence. In these colonies, every resident is a participant in the same cycle of grief, anger, and rebuilding. It creates a localized echo chamber where the divorce now mentality is not just a past event, but a permanent, shared identity. Simultaneously, we are seeing the emergence of the mommune. For Sarah, the financial reality of 2026 necessitated a different kind of adaptation. Instead of moving into a managed complex like Mark, Sarah and 3 other recently divorced women from her social circle pooled their remaining equity to lease a large, high-end estate in a gated community. They have created a new American commune based on shared resources and labor. Step by step, they have restructured their lives to operate as a single economic unit without the presence of partners. One mother handles the school runs, another manages the household finances, and another coordinates the maintenance and grocery logistics. Case studies of these 2026 mommunes show a high level of initial success in reducing the financial burden of separation. By sharing a single mortgage and splitting the cost of a private nanny and a shared vehicle lease, Sarah has managed to maintain a facade of her previous lifestyle. However, this arrangement highlights the fundamental shift in the American social contract. The primary bond is no longer the marital union, but the shared utility of survival. These communes are often fragile. They rely on the continued emotional stability of 4 different individuals who are all navigating the trauma of a split. Data suggests that while mommunes offer a temporary safety net, they often struggle with long-term governance, leading to a secondary wave of social fragmentation when one member decides to move on to a new romantic partner, throwing the entire household's economy into chaos. We must also analyze the role of institutional real estate in this geography. In 2026, hedge funds and private equity firms have identified the divorce now trend as a premier investment opportunity. They have developed what is known as the divorce-to-rent pipeline. When a couple like Mark and Sarah is forced to liquidate their home quickly to divide assets, these institutional buyers are waiting with cash offers that are often 10% below market value, but feature a 48-hour closing time. Once the home is acquired, the firm does not sell it. Instead, they convert it into a rental property and often market it back to the very demographic that just lost their homes. Imagine a suburban block in a city like Phoenix or Atlanta. In 2026, it is common to find that 5 houses in a row are owned by the same investment corporation. 3 of those houses are occupied by single-parent renters who were forced out of their own mortgages by the divorce now mentality. This is the institutionalization of domestic instability. The American dream of homeownership is being replaced by a permanent rental class, fueled by the rapid churn of the marital unit. The potential outcomes here are clear: the loss of generational wealth transfer, and the concentration of property in the hands of corporations that profit from the lack of social permanence. Furthermore, we are seeing the rise of the divorce corridor in our city planning. In 2026, certain zones of metropolitan areas are becoming de facto transition zones. These areas are characterized by high concentrations of short-term rentals, storage facilities, and legal offices. They are the physical manifestation of a society in flux. For a child like Leo traveling between the mommune and the co-parenting nexus, the city is no longer a collection of neighborhoods, but a series of logistics hubs. He is learning that space is temporary, and that your environment is something you rent, not something you build. The cultural impact of these new living arrangements is a total redefinition of what it means to be a neighbor. In the 2026 divorce colony, you don't get to know the person next door because you share a fence or a school board. You get to know them because you share a court date. The social bonds are rooted in shared crisis rather than shared aspiration. This creates a high-intensity, low-stability social environment that researchers call the transience trap. When everyone around you is in a state of transition, there is no one to provide the steady, long-term perspective needed to anchor a community. Step by step, the divorce now mentality is hollowing out the suburban infrastructure. The schools that were built for stable, long-term families are struggling to adapt to the high-churn enrollment of the colonies. The local businesses that relied on the steady spending of established households are being replaced by transactional services tailored to the newly single. We are building a nation of nomads who are connected by contracts rather than commitments. But what happens when this geography of fragmentation meets the new biological reality of 2026? While we are restructuring where we live, we are also restructuring how we live within our own bodies. The stress of the divorce now culture is not just changing our neighborhoods, it is changing our health, our longevity, and our very chemistry. In the next part, we are going to look at the biological cost of the split. We will analyze the 2026 data on the divorce-driven health crisis, the rise of the separation sickness phenomenon, and how the trauma of a high-churn lifestyle is physically aging the American population. We are moving from the concrete of the suburbs to the cells of the human body, and the findings are a wake-up call for anyone who thinks a divorce is just a change in paperwork. You are about to see the true cost of liberation, and it is written in your DNA. The biological reality of the divorce now mentality in 2026 is far more invasive than a simple change in lifestyle or a division of assets. It is a fundamental restructuring of the human nervous system. To understand this, we must look at Mark's medical records 6 months after his separation from Sarah. Mark is 42 years old, but according to a series of epigenetic tests commonly used in 2026 to determine biological age, his cellular markers indicate a body closer to 52. This 10-year discrepancy is not an outlier. It is a recurring potential outcome seen in thousands of case studies across the United States. We are witnessing the physical manifestation of what researchers call allostatic load, which is the cumulative wear and tear on the body systems due to chronic exposure to fluctuating or elevated neural or neuroendocrine responses. In the high-stress environment of a 2026 divorce, the body remains in a state of hypervigilance. For Mark, the constant uncertainty regarding his living situation, the logistical friction of the co-parenting nexus, and the underlying grief of the split have kept his sympathetic nervous system in a state of permanent activation. This is the fight or flight response that was originally designed to help humans escape immediate physical danger. However, when this system is triggered 24 hours a day by emotional and social instability, it becomes toxic. The body flooded with cortisol and adrenaline begins to prioritize short-term survival over long-term maintenance. This leads to the rapid shortening of telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes that prevent DNA from fraying. Historical trends in contemporary 2026 data suggest that individuals undergoing high-conflict separations experience telomere attrition at a rate significantly faster than those in stable environments. This is literal, physical aging happening at the microscopic level. We must also analyze the phenomenon known as separation sickness, which Sarah began to experience shortly after the move to the commune. Humans are biologically wired as co-regulating social animals. In a long-term marriage, partners subconsciously regulate each other's heart rates, sleep cycles, and even immune responses. When that bond is severed, the internal biological clock is thrown into chaos. Sarah found herself struggling with a profound sense of physiological disorientation. Her sleep architecture collapsed. In 2026, wearable health trackers can provide granular detail on this shift. Sarah's deep sleep and REM cycles, essential for cognitive processing and emotional regulation, dropped by nearly 60%. Without the presence of a partner to co-regulate her nervous system, her body lost its ability to enter a state of true rest. This sleep deprivation feeds back into the divorce now cycle, making the individual more impulsive, more irritable, and less capable of the complex communication required for successful co-parenting. Furthermore, we must look at the cardiovascular impact of this cultural shift. In 2026, cardiologists are seeing a surge in what is colloquially known as the divorce heart. This is not just a poetic metaphor for sadness. It is a measurable medical condition. The chronic inflammation caused by the divorce now stress response leads to an increased risk of hypertension and atherosclerosis. For men in Mark's demographic, the risk of a major cardiovascular event increases by nearly 35% following a divorce. Part of this is biological, but part of it is the loss of the health monitor effect. In a marriage, partners often serve as the primary early warning system for medical issues. Sarah was the one who noticed when Mark's snoring became sleep apnea. She was the one who insisted he check a suspicious mole. In the isolation of the post-divorce reality, these small but life-saving observations vanish. The result is a population that is not only more biologically fragile, but also less likely to seek preventative care. The impact on the immune system is equally devastating. Case studies from 2026 show that the stress of marital dissolution leads to a suppression of the body's natural killer cells, which are responsible for fighting off viruses and even early-stage cancer cells. When Sarah moved into the communal living space, she found herself catching every minor illness that the other children brought home. Her body was no longer equipped to mount an effective defense because its resources were being consumed by the internal psychological war. This is the hidden health tax of the divorce now mentality. It creates a baseline of chronic inflammation that acts as a catalyst for autoimmune disorders and other long-term health complications that may not fully manifest for years, but are being seeded in the moment of the split. Then we have the most profound biological cost, the genetic legacy being passed to Leo and Emma. We are now entering the realm of epigenetics, the study of how behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. In 2026, we understand that the high cortisol environment of a broken home can actually alter the expression of a child's DNA. Imagine 10-year-old Leo. The stress he feels during the transition days between Mark and Sarah isn't just an emotional experience. It is a biochemical event. His body is being bathed in stress hormones during a critical phase of brain development. This can lead to the silencing or activation of specific genes related to stress resilience and social bonding. Historical trends in adverse childhood experiences suggest that children like Leo and Emma are at a higher risk for chronic health issues in their own adulthood, from metabolic syndrome to depression, because their biological set points were calibrated in an environment of instability. The divorce now mentality is creating a generation whose very DNA is being shaped by transience. This leads to a phenomenon called the biological trust deficit. If a child's early development is marked by the frequent dissolution of primary bonds, their neurochemistry may adapt to prioritize short-term gratification and emotional distance. This is a survival mechanism, but it is one that makes it biologically difficult for them to form the stable, long-term partnerships that could break the cycle. We are essentially breeding a society that is genetically predisposed to the very instability that is currently tearing it apart. The economic cost of this biological decline is another layer of the 2026 reality. As health outcomes for divorced individuals and their children plummet, the burden on the American healthcare system increases. We see a rise in the demand for specialized divorce recovery clinics, a new sector of the medical industry that offers everything from cortisol-suppressing treatments to intensive neurofeedback sessions aimed at repairing the damage of the split. However, these treatments are expensive and often inaccessible to those who have already been financially gutted by the legal process. This creates a health wealth gap where the affluent can afford to mitigate the biological damage of their divorces, while the middle and lower classes are left to deal with the accelerated aging and chronic illness that follow. Step by step, we can see how the divorce now mentality moves from a social trend to a biological imperative. It starts with the psychological nudge of an algorithm, moves into the logistical chaos of the co-parenting nexus, and ends with the physical degradation of the human body. We are treating our marriages as disposable, but our bodies were not designed for the constant shock of disposal. We are living through a massive, unintended biological experiment, and the preliminary results from 2026 are clear. The cost of leaving is being paid in years of life expectancy and the health of the next generation. But there is one final frontier we must explore. We have looked at the legal, the financial, the geographical, and the biological. Now we must look at the professional. In the hyper-competitive 2026 labor market, the divorce now mentality is being used as a weapon in a way we have never seen before. Your personal life is no longer private. It is a data point in your performance review. In the next part, we are going to expose the rise of the divorce penalty in the workplace. We will look at how companies are using AI to predict which employees are likely to divorce, and how they are adjusting their hiring, firing, and promotion schedules accordingly. You will see how the instability of your home life is being used to justify the instability of your career. We are moving from the doctor's office to the boardroom, and the data on the professional cost of a split is the final piece of the puzzle you need to understand the full scope of this cultural crisis. In the corporate boardrooms of 2026, the divorce now mentality has evolved from a private social trend into a measurable risk factor handled with the cold efficiency of an insurance premium. To see how this affects the American professional, we must follow Mark into his office at the renewable energy firm. Mark believes his personal life is shielded by the privacy settings of his HR portal. But in 2026, the concept of a private life is an illusion maintained by legacy thinking. Large-scale U.S. employers have integrated sophisticated sentiment analysis and organizational health software into their daily operations. These systems do not just track Mark's output, they track his stability. Imagine if every email you sent, every Slack message you typed, and even the micro-expressions on your face during a Zoom call were analyzed by an algorithm designed to detect emotional volatility. For Mark, the internal devaluation of his marriage that we discussed earlier began to bleed into his digital professional footprint long before he filed for divorce. The software noticed a subtle shift in his communication patterns, a 10% increase in late-night activity, a decrease in collaborative language, and a spike in keywords associated with stress and personal logistics. In the 2026 labor market, Mark was flagged by a stability score algorithm. This is the professional cost of the divorce now mentality. Employers view a divorcing employee not as a person in need of support, but as a compromised asset with diminished cognitive bandwidth. Case studies from 2026 show that the divorce penalty in the workplace is a silent but devastating reality. When a high-stakes leadership position opened up in Mark's department, he was statistically the best candidate. However, the internal AI-driven promotion audit suggested a potential outcome of high turnover risk for Mark. The logic used by the corporate machine is simple and ruthless. An individual currently dismantling their primary social support system is statistically more likely to experience a performance crash, a medical leave of absence, or a sudden career pivot. Consequently, the promotion was given to a colleague with a higher stability rating. This is a primary example of how the divorce now mentality creates a glass ceiling for the newly single. You are not being punished for your personal choices. You are being optimized out of the system because your personal life has become a liability to the quarterly earnings report. We must analyze the specific mechanics of the cognitive bandwidth theory. In 2026, the American workplace demands a level of focus that leaves zero margin for personal crisis. When Mark is in a meeting about a multi-million-dollar solar grid project, but his phone is vibrating with a message from his transition architect or a legal alert regarding his 401k division, he is suffering from what researchers call divided processing. Step by step, the divorce now lifestyle erodes professional excellence. First, there is the time theft where legal and logistical tasks consume the workday. Second, there is the emotional exhaustion, where the energy required to maintain a facade of professionalism leaves nothing for creative problem solving. Third, there is the social withdrawal, as the divorcing employee avoids networking events and office culture to hide their domestic instability. Historical trends indicate that this cycle often leads to an involuntary termination within 24 months of a divorce filing for mid to high-level managers. Let's look at a case study from a major fintech firm in New York City in 2026. The firm conducted an anonymous audit of their executive tier and found that individuals going through a divorce were 60% more likely to make high-risk errors in financial modeling. The firm did not offer more vacation time. Instead, they implemented a mandatory cooling-off policy where any employee identified as going through a major life transition was temporarily removed from high-stakes decision-making. This is the professional equivalent of being put on the disabled list in professional sports. While marketed as a wellness initiative, the real-world impact is the stagnation of the individual's career trajectory. In the 2026 economy, if you are not moving forward, you are moving backward. The divorce now mentality essentially hits the pause button on your professional growth at the very moment your cost of living is doubling. Furthermore, we must address the career pivot trap. The divorce now culture often encourages a total life reset. For many in 2026, this includes quitting a stable job to follow a passion or moving to a new city for a fresh start. This is the professional manifestation of the grass is greener fallacy. Case studies of these divorce pivots show that 80% of individuals who leave their primary career path during the first year of a separation suffer a significant permanent loss in their lifetime earning potential. They are selling their career capital at the bottom of the market. They trade the security and compounding benefits of their established professional network for the temporary dopamine hit of a new beginning. In a 2026 economy defined by AI-driven automation and intense competition, this lack of continuity is often a career-ending move. The economic impact on the U.S. labor market as a whole is staggering. In 2026, the collective loss in productivity due to the divorce now mentality is estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. This has led to the rise of corporate marital insurance. Imagine if your employer offered a benefit that wasn't just health insurance, but a relationship maintenance stipend. Companies are beginning to realize that it is cheaper to pay for a couple's retreat or intensive marriage coaching than it is to replace a high-level executive who has been sidelined by a messy split. However, this creates a new form of corporate intrusion. To qualify for these benefits, employees must grant the company access to even more personal data, creating a feedback loop where your employer becomes the ultimate arbiter of your domestic success. Step by step, the divorce now mentality is hollowing out the professional middle class. We are seeing a trend where the most stable and highest-earning individuals are those who have managed to resist the cultural urge for disposal. They benefit from the compounding effects of a shared household, a double-income safety net, and a stable cognitive environment. Meanwhile, the divorce now generation is caught in a cycle of professional and financial restarts. They are the gig workers of the soul, moving from one job and one relationship to the next, never accumulating the deep capital required for true security in the modern age. But there is a final, even more complex layer to this cultural transformation. We have looked at the individual, the home, the body, and the office. Now we must look at the spiritual and moral vacuum created when a society abandons the concept of the permanent vow. What happens to the American soul when the word forever is removed from our vocabulary? In the next part, we are going to explore the rise of the neo-nihilism movement. We will look at how the divorce now mentality paved the way for a society that no longer believes in the future, and how this is manifesting in everything from our art and architecture to our national politics. We are moving from the boardroom to the very center of the American spirit. You are about to see the ultimate potential outcome of a nation that has forgotten how to stay, and the data on the decline of social trust is a chilling indicator of what comes next. The decline of social trust in the United States in 2026 is not merely an abstract sociological metric. It is the oxygen of a functioning civilization, and it is currently being depleted. To witness the spiritual hollow point of the divorce now mentality, we have to look at the broader community surrounding Mark and Sarah. In 2026, the concept of a multi-generational neighborhood has been largely replaced by the high-churn residential zone. When the foundational unit of society, the lifelong partnership, is rebranded as a temporary optimization, the psychological fallout extends far beyond the bedroom. It infects how we view our neighbors, our government, and our own mortality. This is the era of neo-nihilism, a cultural state where the absence of permanent commitment leads to a total collapse of long-term meaning. Imagine walking through a typical American neighborhood in 2026. You notice that the local park, once a hub for community-led maintenance and shared seasonal festivals, has fallen into a state of utilitarian neglect. In a society dominated by the divorce now mentality, why would an individual invest their limited emotional energy or financial capital into a neighborhood they likely won't inhabit 5 years from now? Historical trends show a direct correlation between marital stability and civic engagement. In 2026, data indicates a 45% decline in volunteerism for local school boards, neighborhood watch programs, and community gardens. When people live with one foot out the door in their private lives, they treat their public spaces with the same transient indifference. The potential outcomes of this shift are a fractured nation of strangers who share a zip code but possess zero shared destiny. This trust deficit manifests in what researchers call the transactional soul. In 2026, social interactions have become increasingly hypercontractual. We see this in the rise of the friendship prenup, a cultural trend where individuals explicitly outline the boundaries and expected returns of their platonic relationships to avoid the emotional messiness of a split. Because Mark and Sarah's social circle was decimated by their divorce, the survivors of that social contagion have become hyperprotective of their own peace. They no longer offer the deep, unconditional support that once characterized American friendship. Instead, they offer curated, time-bound interactions. This is the spiritual cost of the disposable mentality. We have optimized for autonomy, but in doing so, we have engineered a society of profound, unfixable loneliness. We must also analyze the impact on American art and architecture in 2026. Culture is a mirror of our internal stability. In previous centuries, Americans built structures and created art intended to last for 500 years, cathedrals, civic monuments, and family estates. In the Divorce Now era, our architecture has shifted toward the modular and the temporary. We see the rise of the pop-up city and the flat-pack home. These structures are not designed to house a legacy. They are designed for rapid assembly and even faster liquidation. Step by step, our physical environment is being stripped of its permanence. Our art has followed suit, dominated by ephemeral digital content that disappears after 24 hours. This is not just a technological shift, it is a spiritual one. When we no longer believe in the permanence of the marriage vow, we stop believing in the value of anything that outlasts our current emotional state. This leads us to the political consequences of the divorce now mentality. Historically, the family served as the ultimate buffer between the individual and the state. It was a private sphere of authority and support that provided a sense of belonging. In 2026, as the family unit dissolves, individuals are increasingly looking to political tribalism to fill the void. Case studies of political radicalization in the mid-2020s show a high concentration of individuals from fragmented households seeking identity in extreme ideologies. When you don't have a stable home, you seek a stable tribe. The divorce now culture has created a population of politically volatile individuals who view national politics through the lens of their own personal abandonment. They are not looking for policy. They are looking for a surrogate family, making our national discourse more emotional, more polarized, and less rational. Furthermore, we must address the commodification of spirituality in 2026. Traditional religious institutions, which historically provided the moral framework for endurance and sacrifice, have seen a record decline in participation. In their place, a multi-billion-dollar wellness industrial complex has emerged. This new spirituality focuses exclusively on the self. It utilizes the language of healing and boundaries to justify the abandonment of commitments. Imagine if Sarah's primary spiritual guidance comes from a subscription-based app that tells her that her only moral obligation is to her own vibration. This is the theology of the Divorce Now movement. It removes the concept of the sacred vow and replaces it with the concept of the personal journey. The potential outcome is a society with no shared moral baseline, where right and wrong are determined by whoever's personal journey is currently being prioritized. The data on social trust in 2026 is chilling. For the first time in American history, more than 60% of adults report that they do not believe most people can be trusted. This trust deficit is a direct reflection of the domestic reality. If you cannot trust the person you share a bed with to stay when things get difficult, the logical extension is that you cannot trust your business partner, your doctor, or your elected officials. We are building a low-trust civilization, and low-trust civilizations historically stagnate and collapse. They are paralyzed by litigation, bureaucracy, and a lack of innovation. The divorce now mentality is the engine of this decline, as it systematically removes the primary training ground for trust, the long-term, high-stakes commitment of marriage. Case studies in 2026 also point to the rise of the legacy vacuum. When Mark looks at his life, he no longer sees a continuous thread connecting his ancestors to his descendants. He sees a series of disconnected chapters. This loss of historical continuity leads to a profound sense of nihilism. If there is no legacy to build, there is no reason to endure hardship. The divorce now mentality tells you that the only thing that matters is the present moment's satisfaction. This is a recipe for a societal identity crisis. We are losing our ability to think in decades, focusing instead on the immediate relief of the exit door. Step by step, this spiritual decline reconfigures the American psyche. We are moving away from the heroic ideal of the person who stays and builds, and toward the romanticized ideal of the person who leaves and discovers. But as the data from 2026 shows, what they discover is often an empty room and a higher tax bracket. The divorce now mentality promises liberation, but it delivers isolation. It promises a new beginning, but it often results in the end of the very structures that made a meaningful life possible. The question then becomes, is there a way back? Is the divorce now mentality an inevitable evolution of a consumerist society, or can the American spirit rediscover the power of the permanent vow? In the final part of this masterclass, we are going to look at the emergence of the counterculture of commitment. We will analyze the data on the small but growing group of Americans who are intentionally opting out of the disposable lifestyle. We will look at the new marital frameworks being developed in 2026 to resist the algorithmic and economic pressures of separation. You will see the blueprint for a new kind of American stability and the radical steps individuals are taking to reclaim their futures from the divorce industrial complex. The conclusion of this deep dive will provide the most important data points of all: the strategy for survival in an age of abandonment. This is the light at the end of the tunnel, and the roadmap starts with a decision that most of the world has forgotten how to make. The decision to stay in a world designed to make you leave is the ultimate act of rebellion in 2026. While the divorce now mentality has created a massive, high-churn economy of separation, a quiet but powerful counterculture is beginning to emerge across the United States. This movement, often referred to by sociologists as the resilience underground, is comprised of couples who have analyzed the data we have covered in this masterclass and decided to opt out of the disposable lifestyle. They are not doing this out of blind traditionalism, but out of a calculated, data-driven understanding that long-term stability is the only viable path to economic, biological, and psychological prosperity in the late 2020s. To see this in action, we have to look at a potential alternative reality for a couple like Mark and Sarah. Imagine if, instead of falling into the algorithmic trap of the divorce now mentality, they had implemented what is known as a marital firewall. In 2026, this involves a series of intentional high-friction protocols designed to protect the union from the external pressures of the digital and legal tech industries. Step by step, these couples are restructuring their lives to prioritize the unit over the individual, and the potential outcomes are a total reversal of the decline we have documented. The first pillar of this counterculture is the move toward private marital governance. These couples are bypassing the express divorce portals and the divorce industrial complex entirely by creating internal, legally binding frameworks known as resilience trusts. Unlike a traditional prenuptial agreement, which focuses on how to split, a resilience trust focuses on how to stay. It involves a pre-committed investment into a shared asset pool that can only be liquidated after a mandatory 24-month cooling-off period involving intensive, third-party mediation. This isn't about trapping individuals. It is about creating a structural speed bump for the impulsive ego. Case studies of couples using these trusts in 2026 show a 70% higher rate of reconciliation during periods of high friction compared to those using the standard legal system. By making the exit door heavy and slow to open, they give the human heart time to move past the temporary volatility of the dopamine-driven divorce now urge. The second pillar is the practice of digital hygiene and algorithmic resistance. We analyzed how your phone knows you're headed for a split before you do. The Resilience Underground fights back by using shared data profiles. In 2026, these couples utilize platforms that cross-pollinate their search histories and social feeds. When the algorithm tries to serve Sarah a video about a midlife pivot or a new apartment, it is met with the data of her shared goals with Mark, their upcoming family trip, their joint investment targets, and their shared history. They are effectively confusing the machine, preventing it from creating the personalized echo chambers of dissatisfaction that lead to the internal devaluation phase. They are using technology to reinforce the we instead of the me. Furthermore, we must look at the emergence of commitment hubs. These are the physical antithesis of the divorce colonies. In cities like Austin, Nashville, and Charlotte, we are seeing the rise of suburban blocks where the residents sign a community charter focused on marital endurance. Imagine if Mark and Sarah lived in a neighborhood where the social contagion worked in the opposite direction. In these hubs, the local culture does not celebrate the divorce party. It celebrates the 20-year anniversary with more fervor than a wedding. When a couple hits a rough patch, the neighborhood doesn't offer advice on the best litigators. They offer the Resilience Circle, a group of 4 or 5 peer couples who provide the logistical and emotional support needed to weather the storm. This is the restoration of the social buffer. It is a return to the idea that a marriage is a community project, not a private contract. The biological data from these stable clusters is the most compelling evidence of the movement's success. Remember the accelerated aging we saw in Mark? In the Resilience Underground, we see the opposite effect, the co-regulation dividend. Case studies of long-term stable couples in 2026 show that their biological age is consistently 5 to 7 years younger than their chronological age. By maintaining the low cortisol environment of a secure attachment, they are literally repairing their DNA. Their telomeres remain longer, their immune systems remain more robust, and their cognitive function stays sharper well into their 70s. This is the true health-wealth connection. They aren't spending thousands on divorce recovery clinics because they have invested in the preventative medicine of a stable home. The economic impact of this counterculture is what will eventually force the broader society to take notice. While the divorce now generation is liquidating their assets and resetting their retirement clocks, the permanents, as they are sometimes called, are benefiting from the power of compounding commitment. The math of 2026 is brutal. A couple that stays together and manages a single household for 40 years is statistically 8 times wealthier than 2 individuals who have each gone through a mid-career divorce. This wealth isn't just in the bank. It is in the social capital of their children. Leo and Emma, in this alternative reality, aren't suitcase kids. They are the recipients of a generational trust surplus. They enter adulthood with a psychological blueprint for endurance, making them the most sought-after partners and employees in a world otherwise defined by transience and trust deficits. Step by step, the road back to stability involves a total reevaluation of the American dream. It requires a transition from the consumerist model of human connection to the architectural model. You don't find a great marriage. You build one, and then you maintain it with the same rigor you would use for a high-performance business or a piece of historic real estate. The divorce now mentality is a siren song that promises freedom, but delivers a specialized form of debt, emotional, physical, and financial. The resilience movement is the realization that true freedom is found in the depth of a bond that cannot be easily broken. As we conclude this deep dive into the cultural impact of the divorce now mentality, the data leaves us with a stark choice. You can follow the historical trends of the last decade, allowing the algorithms, the legal systems, and the consumerist culture to dictate the lifespan of your most important relationships. You can accept the biological aging, the professional stagnation, and the generational trust deficit as the inevitable price of modern life. Or you can choose to be an outlier. You can implement the firewalls, join the hubs, and commit to the compounding benefits of the long view. The United States in 2026 is at a tipping point. The infrastructure for separation is fully built and highly optimized, but the human cost is becoming too high to ignore. We are moving toward a future where the most valuable asset you can own is not a piece of technology, a cryptocurrency, or a stock portfolio. It is a person who will not leave. The strategy for survival in this age of abandonment is simple, yet radical: stay. But how do you stay when everything around you is telling you to go? How do you rebuild a connection that has already been eroded by years of digital noise and cultural pressure? In the follow-up to this masterclass, we are going to provide the tactical manual for the resilience movement. We will dive into the specific communication protocols that neutralize the algorithmic gaslighting, the financial structures that protect your household from the divorce industrial complex, and the daily rituals that reset your biological clock. We have analyzed the crisis. Now it is time to build the solution. The era of the disposable spouse is ending, and the era of the high-performance partnership is just beginning. You have the data. Now you have to decide which side of history your legacy will be on. Stay tuned for the blueprint of the new American stability.